All right, how's everything going?
Good so far.
Good so far. All right, so I graded high-low. High-low looked really good. Got some talking cows, which is always good. So the main issues on the high-low game PA3 were one, just not following directions. Okay, so playing from 0 through 100, or reversing what the meaning of H and L are, or things like that, right? Using random guesses instead of dividing the high-low in half. That was probably the most common set of issues. And the second most common set of issues was edge cases, right? So pick a number between 1 and 100 and play the game and it guesses your number correctly. That's good, okay? That's the core functionality that gets you most of the points. What are the edge cases that you would test?
Not an integer? Or
Okay, except I said you can assume that if there's an argument, it's a positive integer.
as you incorrectly guess the number, you pass your number and it doesn't search within the number, so you guess too low or guess too high.
Okay,
And it
So-
doesn't find your number.
so how would we force it into one of these conditions? Yeah. Cheat. What kind of cheat?
Find that makes the high less than low.
Okay, so we think of the number 60, we get it down to where it's about to say, I think your number is 60, and then we tell it that's either low or high, right? And those are two separate cases. If it guesses your number and you say that's high, or if it guesses your number and you say that's low, there's different things happening in each of those cases, so I would test both of those to make sure that it detects cheating. What are other edge cases? What about if you pick the number 100? Is that an edge case? Probably. Pick the number 100, make sure it actually goes up to and tries guessing 100. Same thing if you pick the number 1, make sure it works all the way down to 1 and it doesn't give up at 2, it actually says, is your number 1, right? And then try cheating. Pick the number 100, get it up to where it guesses 100, and then say that's wrong, that's too low, and make sure it calls a cheat. Get it down to 1, say that 1 is too high, make sure it detects that, right? And then do the same thing with something bigger than 1 to 100. Play from 1 to 1,000 and try those. So those are all different cases, and they sound like what you'd expect, right? But different things go wrong in different situations there. So and that was the second most common thing was some of these edge cases. The code would get up to 98 and say you must be cheating. Or it would get up to 100 and you'd say that's low and it would guess 100 again, right? So things like that. But core functionality worked great, right? Documentation of the code, coding style is looking really good. So that's good progress. Question over there? Question?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. So yeah, keep up the good work with that. And if you have questions about my comments on the assignment, let me know. Questions on the current ODP? Yeah.
Questions on the last ODP.
Okay.
Does it auto-grade and go into Canvas?
It doesn't go into Canvas till I push it in.
Oh, and you haven't done
So
that.
I haven't pushed the last one in, no.
Okay.
I got a question.
Yeah.
In PA3, I got twice 100.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you fix that problem?
It guessed 100 twice.
Yeah.
So could be a few things. So you've got your high and your low values that you're guessing, and you've got your guess, which is the average. So chances are, if it was guessing 100, your high and low probably were both 100. Maybe it was 99 or something, right? And your guess turned out to be 100 for some reason. Even in this case, if it was, say, 99 and 100, your guess is 100. So if you say that's low, what it should do is change low to this guess plus 1, right? So low equals guess plus 1 equals 101. And at that point, your low is bigger than your high. That's where you can say game's over. You must have forgotten your number, right? Or if they tell you that 100 is high, then you're going to change your high to be your guess minus 1, which will be guess is 100. That'll bring your high to 99. Now, your low is not bigger than your high yet, so the game's still going, right? But if the low was 100, right, at this point you'd know that something went wrong. So high and low are basically squeezing your guesses down to be somewhere between low and high inclusive, right? And guess is somewhere close to the middle of that. And then depending on whether that guess is high or low, you either go below the guess or you go above the guess, right? But the guess itself is not in range anymore, right? So whether you do guess plus 1 or guess minus 1, it should never make the same guess again. So my guess would be maybe you're not doing the plus or minus 1 in here. But if you want to combine, we can look at it. Mm-hmm.
So is there any way to make this faster than binary without changing your options from high or low? High, low, correctly,
You could maybe say like, I mean, you could do something like warm or cold or warmer or cooler.
Yeah, because I talked to my calculus professor about the binary search.
Mhm.
I was talking to you about switching it. So one, we created a difference formula.
Mm-hmm.
So the formula for the binary search is like x over 2 to the n. And so the number of tries it takes to get it is just the inverse of that, log base 2 of n.
Right.
And then looking at it like from the way I wanted to try it, the 70-30 split,
Mhm.
what it really does is it just creates this normal distribution where the center most common point is just log base 2 of n.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it gets further away towards the edges, like really small or really big numbers that they guess, the number of guesses increase
Right.
based on probability, and it just creates a normal distribution.
Okay.
So he said outside of changing the number of inputs, he didn't see a way mathematically you could make it better, like if you did it not binary, but you did it like 3 choices or 4 choices.
Yeah. I don't think you can make it better like in all cases. If you were to take an average of all cases, I don't think you can do better than log 2 of n. But if you let them say like, you know, that's really low or that's a little low, right, then you can definitely get brave with how you cut those intervals. So if it's just a little low, maybe you'll throw away more than just the lower half. Maybe you'll throw away 3/4 or something. But yeah, that's an interesting question. So other questions, comments? Yeah.
I'm not sure I completely understand what a global variable is. This is.
So for
talking
ODP?
about the current ODP.
Okay, so let's talk about globals. So your ODP, you're writing a pair of functions, put and get. And put is supposed to save an integer somewhere, and get is supposed to retrieve whatever integer you saved. So you can call put 17, and then 5 days later you can say get, and it should give you the value 17. Right? If you say put 17, and then you say put 3, and then you say put 5, and then you call get, it should just give you that 5. So it's just remembering the last thing that you put. Okay? And the way we can do this is with globals. I like that tone, whatever it is. No, I do like it. I think it reminds me of grade school or something. All right, so let's play around with some functions. So I've got a main program that's going to set x equal to 12, print out the value of x, and then call a function named sub, and then print out the value of x again. Okay, and this is certainly not going to bring us any joy. Yeah.
Need a return? No, we don't.
No return. I'm going to start using voids. How many people get freaked out by voids? Okay, so void is just saying there's no return type. So instead of saying I return an int or I return a float or something, when you say void, you're not returning a void, you're saying there is no return value. So it won't insist that I have a return parentheses something, right? In fact, if I try to return something, it'll probably complain at me. So it's just no arguments, no return value. Is that less freaky? Okay. All right, so what's this called? PC. All right, so I run PC, and not surprisingly, x is equal to 12. I call my function, and then when I print out x, x is still 12. Right, and we know this is going to happen. There's no reason why doing this is going to change this. Right? Because we've declared x to be a variable here inside this function, it's local to that function. Now, if I get rid of this, then it'll give me compile errors because in sub there's no notion of what x is. Right? So it doesn't have a variable x to work with. So we can do the following. And this will compile, and it won't run any differently from before. But this x is not defined inside the function. Okay, it's defined outside. But this is the x that this x equals 100 is referring to. So it's a global variable from this point on down in my file. And if I had another function that tried to do something with x, it would also affect this x. Okay, now if I put this up here, right, this is global in the entire file. So even though int x is declared up there in the beginning, and down here is my function named sub, right, this x equals 100 will refer to this x up here. And that'll compile fine, but it'll still run exactly the same way. Because when I say x equals 12, it says what x should I be setting equal to 12, and it finds this x right here. So there's a notion of scoping of variables. Okay, the scope of a variable is basically what's the range in my file where this variable exists. And this integer x, since it's defined inside this function main, its scope is from here to here. And anytime I refer to x, it's referring to integer x if I'm referring to it in this section. But if I refer to x somewhere else, since there's no x defined in here, it's going to pick up this variable. So now, if I just get rid of this integer x inside main, when I say x equals 12, what x is it referring to?
The global x.
It's referring to this one. And when I say x equals 100, it's referring to that one also. So now this works the way that we would expect. So a global variable is a variable that's scoped at something bigger than just inside one particular function. Typically it's scoped across the entire file, but it might just be, from some point in your file on down. But the critical point is multiple functions can access that same variable. Okay, so this is a way that we can pass information from one function to another without having to actually pass it. It's usually considered kind of sloppy, and it can get you in all sorts of pain. Because if you forget that you've got a global named x, right, you can start doing things that you didn't want to do. But for this ODP, you need to use a global. Okay, so the goal of the ODP is to be able to put a value and save it somewhere and then be able to call get and read that value back. So if I have some local variable inside put and I set that equal to the argument, that value goes away once you've exited. Okay, the only way you can get that value to retain itself is if you make it global. And then get can simply read that global variable and return its value. So questions about that? So just kind of for general information, you want to call a function, you want to pass it a variable. I'm calling this sub for subroutines. So subroutines are functions that aren't functions. They usually don't return values, but it's a function. So we're calling this function, we're passing it a 5, and inside our function, we've got some value. So this thing, which is an argument, that's automatically a local variable. Okay, and if I'm calling it x, anytime that I do something with x inside this function, it's referring to this x that was passed in as an argument. Okay, even if somewhere up here there's a global variable named x, right? This x refers to the argument. If you don't want that to be the case, call it something different. Call it xx. And now if I refer to x, I'll be picking up this global variable. If I use xx, I'm getting that argument.
Is the decision of which variables will have like compile time or run?
Compile time. Pretty much always, I believe. But wouldn't state that 100%. So I define a local variable here. I call it local, right? And inside here I can say local equals 17. So let's try something. So here's a local variable. Let's print out its value. And then let's set it equal to 42. And let's just call this function a few times. Just call it twice. Let's do it 3 times. All right, so what are we going to do? Our main program is going to call our function 3 times. And inside our function, we have a local variable. We're going to print out its value, and then we're going to set that local variable to 42. So the first time we call this, it's probably going to print gibberish, right? And then it's going to set this variable to 42, and then we're going to return, and we're going to call this function again. When we print the value of local that second time, is it going to print 42?
Unlikely.
Unlikely, but possible. I'm going to call this a bunch of times. Let's see what it does. And it does.
Because local is carried over from the first time.
Yeah. So the first time it's gibberish. We expected that. And if we do this again, we get different gibberish. But that value of local, even though it's local, it seems to retain its value. So let me try something else. just throw a print statement in here. I don't know if this will do anything or not. That didn't change it. Let's see if we can break this. So what happened here?
You only called sub 4 times.
I only called sub 4 times. I called sub 2, and then I called sub again. So the first time I called sub, it printed out local equals gibberish. And then I called sub 2, which sets this, my local variable, equal to 100. And then I called sub, and I asked to print out the value of this local variable, and it printed 100. And 100 was the value that I set to this local variable down here. Different function, different variable name, and completely local. But somehow when I called sub and I tried to print out the value of this local variable, it printed out the value of this other local variable in this other function that I already called and exited. So this should look a little weird to you. And this is the kind of thing that you can end up fighting against for hours late at night when you got a bug in your code, right? And there's no easy rhyme or reason for what's going on here, okay, except there is. So when you have a local variable, you're telling the compiler, I need this variable as long as I'm in this function, but once I exit from this function, I don't need this variable anymore. So the compiler's not going to pick some location in memory and say, this location is where I'm storing this variable local. Because if it does that, that location in memory is permanently being allocated to store this variable, and you don't care about this variable outside of this function. So we would like to store this somewhere in memory where it can reclaim that memory space once this function exits. Okay, and the place it does that is the stack. So think engineering 270 if you've done that, stack storage. So when you call a function, you take your return address, you push that onto the stack, right? So that when you say return, it knows where to go back to. But the stack is also used for storing these local variables. Why? Because as soon as you say return, your stack pointer gets reset to where it was before you called, and if your local variables were stored in that stack, now that stack space is free. So what's happening over here, this variable is stored on the stack, and I set that location on the stack equal to 100, and then I returned. Well, when I called sub, this variable local is being stored on the stack in the same place where my local was being stored. So if I just print out the value of local, the stack never gets erased, so it prints out the value of the local variable from here. Now if I set it equal to 42, right, now that location in the stack is set to 42, and when I come back and I call sub again, it still sees a 42 there. It might not. If other functions get called in between, I'll pick up gibberish. Right? So this is also a bit of a security concern, because I'm reading the value of local variables from a different function. So what if sub2 was the thing that checked your password to see if you were authenticated, and it had some local variable that was temporarily set equal to the correct password? And now if I just call some other function and I make a local variable and I don't initialize it, it picks up the value that you had in that other function. So memory is a little weird. Memory management is complex. All right, so that's just freebie weirdness. None of which you need for the ODP, but good stuff. All right, so put, basically take your argument, copy it to a global variable. Get, basically just return the value of that global variable.
Are we picking what variable goes in there, or are we asking the user to input a variable?
What do you mean?
Well, it says save the value of x, so does our program assume that we're setting the value of x to something, or is it saying, hey, put something in and we're gonna save it here and then return it?
So you only save it inside put,
Okay.
right? So write a function put that basically, so you can call the global whatever you want, right? And you write a function put that basically takes one argument, which is an integer, and just copies it to your global.
And that's it.
And that's it.
Okay.
And your function get just takes the value of that global and returns it as the function value. And put is defined to return a 0 in this case, right? For no particular reason, but return value of the put function should be 0.
Okay.
And unlike some of the past ODPs, this pretty much either works or doesn't work. There's not a whole lot of edge cases. Okay, if it works in one or two cases, it's probably correct. Yeah.
When you run your test code, like for when you assess it, for functions like that where it's like input where it just returns a 0, do you check like if you were to make that void, would the assess catch that?
Yeah, probably. I think I check it to make sure it's an integer that's equal to 0. But you can try it, because maybe I was in a I don't care mood when I wrote it. I don't remember. All right, so any other questions on this?
How about use a constant int here for
Co-
global value?
What do you mean a constant int?
I mean static memory allocation.
So you can declare it static. You don't have to, but old school, you would put the keyword static in front of here. And that would tell it not to move it around in memory. It would make sure it wasn't on the stack. I don't think that has to be done anymore. I don't understand actually why I always said static before and why we don't have to now, but it doesn't hurt. All right, PA4 questions. Hopefully everyone got started on PA4.
When trying to do the super duper get call, how do you ignore the single quote or the double quote? Because you try to quote a quote, it kind of.
You can escape it. Should be able to say, if you're putting it inside double quotes, you can escape a double quote like that. If you're going inside single quotes, I think you can do that. But let's see. Let's see if it works. Look at all those errors for like 4 lines of code.
You have a giant eye.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so that works. So yeah, inside single quotes, you can do a backslash single quote, and that tells it it's not ending the string, it's just a character. And while we're here, right, so for a double quoted string, which is an actual string instead of a character, you can do backslash double quote, and that turns it into just a single character. This changed my life 32 years ago, by the way. That backslash quote was a launching point for all my current research and my research over the past 3 decades. So backslashes are cool.
How would you check multiple white spaces in a row?
Do you have to?
I would believe you should, because it's asking you when you're doing the phrases, if there's like 5 white spaces, it kind of has to condense down to 1.
Well, yes and no. So, let me pull up the actual text. I got a new monitor over the weekend. I'm like so psyched. I had like a 43-inch 4K. And this little laptop will drive 4096 by 2160, which is the max resolution of this thing. And it's like so freaking cool because I have like all my windows open all the time. And I don't have to like move them around and anything. So now I'm kind of like, what's wrong with my monitor? I can only fit one thing at a time. All right, so a phrase begins with any non-space character, non-punctuation character, collection of letters, and then it ends with punctuation. So if you're reading your input, right, character at a time, so C equals my super duper get car. If C is a space or punctuation, you just go back up here. So you can do a while loop, right? While C is not equal to space, and while C equals space or C equals question mark or C equals exclamation mark, just keep setting C equal to super duper get car, right? So you basically keep looping up here as long as you have a space or a punctuation. So that's automatically going to skip over multiple spaces or multiple periods or things like that, right? And then in here, right, save that character in the beginning of your phrase, increment your phrase index, and then get your character if C is not equal to punct. Save it. Go back. And then when it is punctuation, right, null terminate. So the effect is it's skipping over a bunch of white spaces in the beginning, but that's not really what you've coded, right? You're basically, you can think of it as I'm looking for the first thing that's not a space or a punctuation. So if it is a space or punctuation, read another character. If that's a space or punctuation, read another character. Keep doing that until it's not a space or a punctuation, and then start saving everything you read in your phrase. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to put that into a switch statement so you don't have to say like or punctuation?
Yeah. Although my suggestion was make a start a phrase that returns like a 0 or a 1. And then in there you can do a bunch of ifs, so you can do an if with a bunch of ors, or you can do a switch statement. The other nice thing about modularizing is it lets you feel like you're making progress in smaller steps, which is like totally legitimate feeling. Hold on, you got a question there?
You say that we can assume that each phrase is 200 or fewer characters?
No. There could be phrases that are 1,000,000 characters long, but you only have to remember the first 200 characters of the phrase. So when you're ingesting and you're building up your phrases here, right, check to see if your phrase index hits 200, and if it does, don't increment it, right? Set a flag or something and say, okay, I'm going to keep reading characters until I get to the end of the phrase, but I'm not going to save them, right, so that you don't blow up your array. But there could be a phrase that goes on past 200. Just remember the first 200 characters. Is that clear, the difference between those?
Well, yeah, but it does say that you can assume. But then in parentheses it says throw it away after.
Yeah, okay. All right, you had a question, Connor?
You just pass the phrase onto your next piece of code, which determines if the phrase is unique or not, right?
Yep.
And it's passed as a string.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it can just be one string of length 201. You can make it longer if you want. But 201 bytes, and then that can say, is this a new phrase? If it is, add it to your index. If it's not, bump up the count. And then just loop on that whole collection of calls.
Should it be a phrase I++ equal to the multi-remainder at the end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an alternative. But don't use I, use something more meaningful. Phrase length or phrase index or something like that. Imagine you're being paid by the character in your program, which would be a great gig. Put lots of comments in. All right, any other questions, PA4, ODPs? Good to go for now. All right, well, let's pick up some more bash details. All right, so here's my my high-low program. So make sure that your shebang, your bin bash, is the very first line of your file. If you put comments before that, it doesn't do anything. Okay, doesn't do any harm because I'm running it from bash. But if somebody was running it from a different shell, right? So here's my sh shell. So I can run high-low and that works fine. I think I can break it. Alright, so here's my code, high-low, and it just totally freaks out. Alright, so why is it freaking out? Because I'm running a shell called sh, the bourne shell. And if I just say high-low, it says take the contents of this file and treat it as shell input, right? Run this with the bourne shell. And all of this stuff in high-low, this is not stuff that the bourne shell understands, this if bracket and things like that. So if your first line is this number sign exclamation mark, it says, I don't care what shell you're running, I want you to execute the script using bin bash. And now, even though I'm in the bourne shell, right, it's running this with bin bash. So that works correctly. So the other thing you can do with this is you can put on switches on here and say run this with bin bash with an X switch. I don't know if it's a big X or a little x. I'm going to guess it's a big X. And it's going to be a little x. So when you do this, you start to get some debug information, right? When it assigns a value to a variable, it tells me what it's done. It said low equal to 1, it said high equal to 100. It's about to do an echo statement and so on and so forth. This is marginally useful. I think it's generally easier to put in your own echo statements. But if something is just like really weird going on, sometimes this helps, just the -x switch on your bash. So that's an option, but for me, usually I end up spending all my time trying to figure out what it's displaying to me instead of just putting echo statements.
This plus B that you have, is that how you get your space between your question mark and your revariable? So is your number 75 question mark plus read?
Oh no, I think that's just the weirdness of the dash X switch.
So I couldn't get mine to actually have a space before read.
Let me get rid of this.
It's just one extra.
I got it.
So I just put a space at the end, but I put the whole thing in double quotes. If you don't have it in double quotes, it ignores the space because it's just white space. But if it's in quotes, you can do whatever you like. All right, so if statements. So if bracket bracket condition bracket bracket. So when I'm trying to figure out syntax, right? You can do this on the command line, and it can get a little confusing, but it's faster if you don't get confused. So I said x equals 12, and now I'm saying if $x equals 12, then I'm just going to say print working directory, because that's an easy one-line output command. And I'll say phi, and it prints my working directory, so that if statement seemed to work. And if I try that, then it gives me an error, right? So when you're messing around, oh, I forgot my $sign, but still, right? So when you're messing around with stuff, you don't need to throw it in a script. You can do it from the command line, and you can get through a lot more of this. But when you recall your command, it looks a little different. It throws in these semicolons, right? And semicolons are ways that we can put multiple statements on a single line. And so you can try to fix it up. Right, and that seems to work. And does it work if I put this in quotation marks? Yes, it does, and so on. Right, but I said x equal to 13, and then I said if $x equals 12, print working directory, and it printed my working directory. So it thinks 13 is equal to 12. Right? So why does it think 13 is equal to 12? What did I do wrong on statement 2039? Visible $100 bill to the first person.
It's not the integer, it's the string.
It is a string, but that should be okay. Gotta have spaces around the equal equal. Doesn't give a syntax error, just does something weird. Right, so if I'm getting this weird behavior in a script, right, I'm going to come out of the script, I'm going to start trying these things, and I'm going to try them like 15 different ways on the command line until I understand what's going on. Now, I may not understand why that previous statement was thinking that 13 was equal to 12, but I do understand that that's not what I wanted, right? And that's clearly not what I intended when I said equal equal. But without the spaces, I think this thing inside the bracket is being treated as one thing that's not empty, and so it's true. So it's just weirdness, right? But so So you wanna feel free to just kind of like jump in there and like try stuff, right? The more you experiment with stuff, the more you're going to learn about it. I could talk for 3 hours on different variations of this, and it's just gonna be words bouncing around the room, right? But if you sit down and you do some of these things yourself, it's going to register in your brain much differently, much more profoundly. And eventually you'll find a version of this that works for you. So definitely, right, keep getting your hands dirty. Whether it's C, whether it's shell scripting, whether it's using Unix commands, get in there and experiment, right? That's going to be what you do the rest of your lives in your careers. Someone tells you, okay, you have to start using R because we're going to be doing some big data work here, right? And maybe they'll send you to a course on R, but maybe not. Maybe they'll just say, you know, here's your account, go and figure out what we need to do. And it's going to be just kind of like sit down and mess around with it and read some documentation, but mostly trial and error. It's sort of the best teacher. All right, so tomorrow, bring questions on PA4, right? You really want to be working on PA4, like preferably this past weekend, but if not, then now, because it's going to take you 2 weeks to do it. So we'll take questions tomorrow, and then I want to just start picking up some more things in Bash, some other capabilities, some different types of loops, some if statements, some traps, and stuff like that. So we'll be messing around with Bash for the next few days. I'm going to try to post a study guide for the midterm for the midterm today. I'm going to try to write the midterm this afternoon, so I'll post up a quick study guide, and we can talk about that.